Hello everybody, it's Kara from Wild Book Garden, and today I'm here with my most surprising books of 2021. So, as you can tell by the title, this is going to be books that surprised me in various ways. Maybe I had not expected great things, but I ended up really enjoying them. Maybe it was a different kind of book or a different story than I expected. Maybe the story of the book literally surprised me, like in the directions it went. There's a lot of reasons books could end up on this list, and this is always a really fun video to do because I get to talk about books I love that maybe don't necessarily make it to my favorites list, but they're still ones I really enjoyed and that I'm excited to talk about. And I have a lot this year. Like, I think this is the most I've had, but I went through and I cut things and I still have a really long list. So I'm going to start with the ones where I don't have a copy of the book with me just for ease of editing. First I have Starfish by Lisa Phipps. This is a contemporary novel in verse, and we are following a young girl who I think she's in middle school, and she's plus sized, and the book deals a lot with the fat phobia that she experiences in school, from her family, from her doctors, and some of it is very, very difficult to read for obvious reasons. It's infuriating to see people, especially people who are supposed to love and support her, like her family, just say these horrible things to her and treat her in this terrible way. But there's a lot of hope in this book as well, and one of the things I really loved about it is the really strong support system that our main character had. Her dad is really wonderful. Her friendships that she has are just fantastic. Like this is, I think, these stand out as some of the best friendships or my favorite friendships that I have read this year. I just think they were wonderful. And we also see like people in authority, like other medical professionals who do treat this main character, I'm sorry I don't remember her name, I read it from the library, but who do treat her the way that she deserves. And it's just a really lovely book, and it's a very emotionally effective one. Then I also wanted to mention Madam Will You Talk by Mary Stewart, and this was a buddy read with my friend Mary Margaret. This is one of her favorite authors, and this is the book that kind of kickstarted my love for Mary Stewart's books. This is the first one I read, and it's just really enjoyable, and I was just surprised at how into these books I am, because some of the elements are things I wouldn't necessarily like, or I wouldn't think I would. Like I've mentioned before that sometimes the men, a lot of times, the love interests are a little pushier than I would like, but the reason that that doesn't bother me as much is because the female main characters are always incredibly competent and really like strong and hold their own, and like I don't feel, it's like I wish the men were a little less pushy, but I feel like the women are like equally strong and assertive, and I feel like that makes it a little better for me. And yeah, these were just like the first romantic suspense I read, although I have since heard that this is maybe not indicative of the genre designation as we use it now, but I have just been really enjoying this author, and I was like just really surprised by what a great time I've been having with her books. I also want to mention The Count of Monte Cristo by Alexandre Dumas, translated by, oh, I don't remember the translator of the edition I read. I'll put it on the screen because I really liked this translation. This book definitely surprised me because last year I reread The Three Musketeers by Alexandre Dumas for Past Classics, and we all hated that book. We really didn't like it. And I was very nervous because this is a really, really long book. I think my edition is like 1,200 pages or something. So I was worried that I was gonna dislike a book for 1,200 pages. But I didn't. I really liked this. I really liked the writing and the humor. I love the themes here. Like about vengeance and forgiveness, and there's just a lot. Like I have a whole spoiler-free review on this book, so I will link that down below. But I just really enjoyed it, and I was also buddy reading most of this with my friend Kelly from Cozy Reader Kelly, and it was just really fun to discuss it with her. The plot went in some really interesting directions. I thought the main character is fascinating, and also I was really pleasantly surprised by the female characters in this book. Like they're not like masterpieces of feminist writing or anything, but compared to Three Musketeers, like they're really good. There's a few female characters in particular who I think are really interesting and really well written, and even though I don't like how things turned out for them in some respects, like I had some issues with this book, especially related to the ending, but overall this was just a book I really enjoyed, and I was very pleasantly surprised. I also want to mention Tokyo Ever After by Miko Jean. This is a contemporary that's been pitched as Princess Diaries, but it's a Japanese-American girl instead. And I like this a lot better than Princess Diaries, actually. I really enjoyed this. This one has gotten mixed reviews. I think, like, if you're wanting, it depends on what you're wanting from this book, because I actually really enjoyed the like the character growth, the coming of age aspect of this book. There is a romance, which I thought personally was the weakest part of the book. It wasn't bad, it just wasn't like something I enjoyed particularly. but I really liked our main character. I really liked her voice. I really liked the family elements of this book, like this main character trying to decide what kind of relationship she wants with her father, if she does want one. She's also in Japan for the first time, and also the way that she navigates being of two cultures. Like, I just think there was a lot to love here, and I was pleasantly surprised because I hadn't heard great things about this one. Also, I wanted to mention The Matchmaker's Lonely Heart by Nancy Campbell Allen, I think, is the author. This was surprising for several reasons. I was surprised I ended up reading it because I actually was supposed to get a review copy of a different book from this publisher, and there was some kind of mix-up, and they were very like gracious about it, and they apologized, and it actually ended up working out great because when I read the synopsis for this one, I'm like, actually, this sounds really good. So it was a surprise that I got the book, and I was also surprised by how much I enjoyed it. Not that I wasn't expecting to, but it just ended up, like, I gave this one 4.5 stars. I think it was fantastic. I love the romance. Like, the two leads are just so cute together, and I mentioned in my review, which I will link below, I just really like the fact that they're equally flustered for the other, because that's not something we see a lot. I also want to mention very quickly, because I've mentioned it several times recently, The Countess and the Frog by Ken Lee Davidson. This is a prequel in the Andari Chronicles series, and of the 3 books I've read so far, it's my favorite. And it's a novella, which I sometimes have a hard time with romance novellas, but this was developed beautifully. There's also an age gap, which is not something I tend to like, but I think that was done pretty well for the most part. Like, I just really enjoyed this. This is a very loose Princess and the Frog retelling, and another reason I was surprised by this one is because I had read the first official, like, full-length novel in the series, and I had mixed feelings. It's called Traitor's Mask. I liked some things, I disliked other parts, and I just wasn't sure, like, what to expect from this story, and I did end up really, really enjoying this one. I also wanted to highlight Root Magic by Eden Royce. Now, this is probably not a surprise for a lot of people because a lot of people were anticipating this one. It got great reviews, but I just hadn't put it on my radar because I was interested in it, but it wasn't like on my most anticipated releases list, for example. And I don't know why. Maybe I didn't have a real feeling for the synopsis, or I don't know what it was. But this was just really a fantastic book. I loved the writing itself, and I really loved our main character. Her name is Jez, which is short for Jezebel, and I just loved the family aspects. I really loved the cultural elements and like learning more about the Gullah-Geechee people. I think the historical fiction element was done really well. I like the discussion of education. It wasn't like the primary focus, but it was definitely in here. And I adored Jez as a main character so much, and the way that she is not willing to compromise her values, even though she does want to like honor this traditional like root work and root magic. And there's just so much to love about this. Like, listen to every positive review you have heard about this book, because I agree, it's true. And yeah, this is a great example of one that I wasn't like most anticipating, but it ended up blowing me away. This is one, like, it's right on the cusp of making a favorites list for me, so you may see this again. We'll see. But I love this. The Halcyon Fairy book by T. Kingfisher. This is a really interesting book because the first half is a collection of annotated fairy tales, like just really wild fairy tales that T. Kingfisher like started commenting on her blog for fun, and people really liked it, so she ended up putting it into a book. And then the second half is retellings, and this is on this list because even though T. Kingfisher is a favorite author for me, this is like a very interesting book, and the thing that surprised me is there were a couple of stories in particular. Like, there's a Snow White retelling here, I think called Boar and Apples. Yeah, Boar and Apples. That I think is like one of my favorite Snow White retellings now, if not my favorite. I just think it was fantastic. And I was also surprised that I even got to read this. I mentioned this before, but a very kind person on Twitter who had worked with the author ended up with some extra copies and was able to send one my way, which I am so very grateful for, because this is very hard to find a print copy of. But yeah, I just really enjoyed that. I always want an excuse to talk about T. Kingfisher. For next, I have one of several Past It Classics books on this list. That is East of Eden by John Steinbeck. I have hated pretty much everything else I've read from John Steinbeck, so I was very nervous to go into this one, which is also quite a chunker. But this is such a conflicting book. I am surprised at how invested I was in it, which is why it's on this list. There's some really, really beautiful parts. There's some fantastic character work. I think the themes are interesting. Like, I will link our live show down below where we really get into all of that. This is not a perfect book though. Like, I will list content warnings, or maybe I'll just link to my Goodreads account because I have a lot of books to talk about. Like, there's a lot in these, like a lot. And some of it is stuff you could probably guess from the time period. Like, it is super racist in a lot of places. And then there's also some places where it's more forward thinking than you'd expect. Like, there's some really interesting things regarding this one character named Lee, who is Chinese or Chinese American, and it's just like a very mixed bag. I'll link my wrap up where I talk about this book because I had very mixed feelings then. There's some parts that I love, and like there's some parts of this book that I think I'm going to think about forever because of how beautifully they were done and how effective they were and how emotional they were and how attached I got to some of these characters. But then there's some places where like I hated the reading experience of this book. So it was a mixed bag, but I was surprised at how invested I was in this one. Also from Past It Classics, Can You Forgive Her by Anthony Trollope. This was another kind of mixed bag, not in the sense that East of Eden was, but there were some things, like the first chunk of this book I flew through. I adored it. I loved the characterization, I loved the humor, I loved the writing, and I still liked a lot of those things as we went on, but I had some real issues with some of the character and plot choices near the end of this book. But this was a pleasant surprise because I had never read anything by Anthony Trollope. Like, the premise of it sounded really interesting. Basically, it's like 3 different women who are faced with romantic choices of like making the safe choice or the romantic choice that might like, you know, ruin parts of their lives, and kind of what they do from there. That's kind of the basic premise. And yeah, like I was hoping I would enjoy this. I picked it as one of my selections, so obviously I was hoping we would like it, but I wasn't sure what to expect because I'd never read this author before, even though he was very prolific. Anyway, but I had a good time with it. Do I have mixed feelings? Yes, but quite a few of them are positive. I also want to mention both Crooked Rock books that I read this year. I think these are the right ones. Yeah, Heartbeat Braves is book 1, Lovesick Braves is book 2. These are both by Pamela Sanderson. And this is a romance series by a Karuk author. And both of these surprised me for different reasons. The first one, because I really didn't like the male lead for like the first half of this book, but he ended up really growing on me. And I also really liked and was surprised by the fact that I was really into the romance by the end of this book. Like, I really actively enjoyed it and wanted these characters to be together, even though they got together much earlier in the book than I tend to like. So that was surprising. And then book 2 surprised me because I didn't care about the romance at all, but I still really loved the book. Like, I just think the plot and the character work was really great. Sight Witch by Susan Dennard. This is a novella. Maybe it's not a novella. It's a very short novel. It's like 2.5, I think, in the Witchland series. And it's like a prequel that kind of sets up some things you need to know for the rest of the series. And this was surprising because I had heard basically everybody was disappointed in this. And I understand why, if you were hoping for the next full-length novel and then you get this prequel, I understand why that's disappointing. But taking this book on its own terms, I actually really enjoyed it. Like, I buddy read this with Hannah from Lynn Hermione, and we both really liked this one, actually. I really liked Riber as a main character. I thought the spooky atmosphere was really well done. It was not something I expected. Yeah, I just like really enjoyed this. I thought the information that we get about other things happening was really interesting. This is just a really solid book for me, and I was expecting not to care for it at all. Before the Coffee Gets Cold by Toshikazu Kawaguchi, translated by Jeffrey Trusselote. This was a surprise because I had heard very like mediocre reviews of this one, and I do think that the first story of the 4 is pretty stilted, but after that I personally think it gets very good. Even though the last story I have some serious issues with, like the implications of, but like as a whole, I think this book just says really profound and interesting things about grief and mourning and love, like different kinds of love, and sacrifice. Like, yeah, I just really ended up enjoying it. Sounds weird because some of it was very rough to read. Like, there was a lot of tears shed for this book, but it just really got to me, and I think it was really well put together. Yeah, like I mentioned every time, but the story that really got me was the one with the sisters. Yeah, like I just think this was well done. Thornwood by Leah Cypess. This is the first book in the Sisters Ever After series, which are like companion books following the sister of like the main character of a fairy tale. So this is a retelling of Sleeping Beauty. We're following the younger sister of the Sleeping Beauty character, and this surprised me in several ways. It surprised me just on a story level because I think the author did some really interesting things with the fairy tale. I just also really loved this as a book. I really loved the writing and the characterization, like the different dynamics that these characters have with each other. And like I said, it surprised me on a plot level. And then also it kind of retroactively surprised me because this has gotten like really low reviews, which makes me sad. I do think that it's a very unusual kind of retelling, so I can see why it wouldn't be everyone's cup of tea, but I really liked it. So yeah. Descendant of the Crane by Joan Huh. This was definitely a surprise for me. This was a buddy read with Manal from Manal and her books. There are so many things about this book that should not have worked for me, but they did, and it was very interesting. I don't really know how to explain why this one did work for me so much because like the characters, some of the supporting characters were not as well developed as I like. I think the main character, like, it was one of those situations where nobody would tell her anything, so she kept making like frustrating choices because she didn't know any better. it was just, yeah, like, and also the romance was pretty underdeveloped, but I liked it anyway. The plot was like really, really gripping and interesting and kind of wild in a lot of places. But normally I'm more of a character reader over a plot reader. Like, there were just a lot of reasons why I would not have thought this would be a book for me, but I really enjoyed it. Like, it wasn't a perfect book for me, but I had a great time. So if you want like a really plot focused, like twisty political fantasy with some really interesting world building and like a lot going on in terms of the politics and the world and the backstory, you might enjoy this. The Turning by Emily Whitman. This was a book that my friend Katie sent to me as part of our TBR swap. I will link that video as well. This is my favorite of the bunch and I just loved it so much. This is one that, like I said at the time, it's going to continue, I think, increasing in my estimation. Like I initially gave it 4 stars, now it's a 4.5, and it probably will be a 5 stars, especially if I reread it. This is a Selkie story and I just loved our main character Aaron. I loved the friends he made. I really, really love what this book did in terms of the themes and the tone, and it just got very like deep and bittersweet in places, which I was not expecting, even though I should have expected it. Yeah, this was just really, really lovely, and it's a really underhyped one. I think more people should read it. Thorn by Intisar Kanani. This is a surprise, like this is kind of a reread, but not really, because I initially read this when it was self-published and it was much, much shorter. So it probably was a significantly different story at that time, and I remember liking it well enough at the time, but I decided to pick it up and reread it again now that it was traditionally published and like expanded, because I really wanted to read the spin-off sequels. So I was kind of like rereading this out of curiosity, but also like preparing to read the other books. So I didn't really have any expectations going in, but I really, really enjoyed this. I know this is one that is kind of hit or miss for people, which I totally get. This is extremely character focused. It's quite slow paced. The main character spends a lot of time like working up to do stuff. But I think that works. Like, I think it made sense for the story. I just love the way that Intisar Kanani writes. I think it's a really like, it's the perfect amount of description for me, and I think she does great character work, and I also think as a retelling of the Goose Girl, this is interesting. I do think that the magic aspects of this book were not as well integrated into the story. Like, it kind of just comes out of nowhere, and then it doesn't really come together until the very, very, very end. At least for me, that's when it kind of made sense. So like, I have criticisms, I guess, of this book, but I did really enjoy it. Okay, y'all knew this one was coming because it was probably, maybe this was the biggest surprise of the year. Bright Smoke, Cold Fire by Rosamund Hodge. This is the first book in a duology that is a really dark take on the Romeo and Juliet story, although it's a very loose retelling in a lot of ways. But this also deals with like necromancy, which is not something I like to read about, and also Romeo and Juliet is not my favorite Shakespeare play. And also, the biggest reason I had kind of low expectations for this book is that every review I have ever seen has been very negative. So even though I have loved other things by this author, I went in truthfully expecting to dislike it. Like, most of the time we go into books, you know, hoping to like them. This is one of the few cases where I was like, this is probably not gonna work for me. But I really liked it. I love Rosamund Hodge's writing. I really like her character work. I think she does character archetypes that I almost never like in ways that I always enjoy, which I just think is incredibly impressive. Like, especially Runaho, who is one of the female leads. I just, like, she's a character type that a lot of authors do, and I think it often comes off as very fake. At least that's the way it feels to me. It's like she's this very, like, stubborn and angsty and, like, I don't know, strong female character in, like, the generic sense. But it doesn't feel that way when Rosamund Hodge writes her. So I don't know why. And I also think the friendships were just fascinating in this book. The politics is really interesting. There is a lot of like, there's a lot going on in this book, but I feel like the book does a good job of not making it too confusing. Maybe that's partly because I had read the synopsis multiple times at that point. But yeah, I really liked this. I don't think I would recommend this as a starting point for Rosamund Hodge's books, but I think this has proved that she's just a favorite author for me, if even something that worked for very few people really works for me. Another retelling that really surprised me is Snow White and Rose Red by Patricia C. Reedy. I had almost unhauled this book a couple times. This was like an impulse buy a long time ago, and I almost got rid of it, and I'm very glad I didn't, because I loved this. This, like, there were a couple of little things that kept it from being perfect for me, but this was almost a 5-star book. It was just like delightful. Like it was just really cozy. I really like the characters. I just tend to like the way that Patricia C. Reedy writes. Like in terms of just like her storytelling in general really works for me. I think that as a retelling this was interesting. I really liked that it was set in Elizabethan times. Like that dialogue that was like flavored with Shakespeare, I just really enjoyed. Although it's not, I think, to the point where you need to be familiar with Shakespeare to understand this book. Yeah, there's like one of the romance subplots I really enjoyed. This is a good reminder of like, it's good to give books a chance sometimes, you know? The Trouble with Kings by Sherwood Smith. This is the book that really solidified Sherwood Smith as like a dependable author for me. This is the 3rd thing I've read from her, I think, and I just love the way she writes. I really love the way that she writes her female characters and the romances in her books and like just the really interesting things she does in her fantasy stories. And this book surprised me. The reason it's on this list is because there were things that I was reading this book and I'm like, oh, it'd be really interesting if this is the direction she went, but authors usually don't do that, so it's not gonna happen. But like she pulled it off. She surprised me. It was so good. I just really enjoyed this. I also really loved our main character. Like I said, I just tend to enjoy the way that she writes her female leads. This was another book that like wasn't perfect for me. There were a few things at the end that were frustrating that didn't need to be, but I had such a good time reading this. I was so invested. I'm realizing I'm giving you like less and less of an actual summary for these books as they go on, so I hope that's okay. You can obviously find that information in my wrap-ups. So we're just gonna keep going. I have All the Stars and Teeth by Adeline Grace. This was another like really big surprise, and I've said this before, but this is a great example of why I don't like to DNF books easily. I understand that works for other people, and I totally get that, but I am very happy with my like reluctant DNF policy because this is a book where if I were more likely to stop reading a book, like to DNF a book, I probably would have done it, and I would have missed out on a book I ended up really enjoying because I was not having a great time for the first like quarter of this book. Like there were things about the writing that were really irritating me, and I also wasn't sure like about some of the story and character stuff, and like it just wasn't pulling me in. I wasn't like excited to keep reading it, but it ended up really turning around for me. I ended up really loving all of our main characters. I really liked the romance. One of the biggest surprises of this book is that there's pirates in it, and I still enjoyed it because I hate pirate stories. I think they are so boring. I know it's like a buzzword for a lot of people. I don't care about them, but this was really good. I really liked it, and I think probably partly because the pirate character is not a very piratey pirate. I've said the word pirate a lot. I also think the writing stopped doing the things that annoyed me as the book went on, so I just really enjoyed this. I also think it went some really interesting directions in terms of the story, and yeah, like this is another female character, by the way, who I think is very physically strong, is strong in very like typical ways, in ways that we often see in fantasy, but she didn't feel like a not like other girls kind of character. She felt very well developed. And I also admired the way that she did not shy away from hard choices. It was just very interesting to read a character who, rather than always thinking they could find a third option, recognize that sometimes you have to make an unpleasant choice. Like, I'm not saying I want that from all my characters, but I think it was really well done in this book. Velvet Was the Night by Sylvia Moreno Garcia. Another buddy read with my lovely friend Yvette from Book Cave. We tend to do this with Sylvia Moreno Garcia's books, and I'm not going to spend too much time on this one because I think you guys know I was surprised by this book, although I shouldn't be. I should just learn to trust this author, because even though I don't like the kind of book this is, which is like a mystery noir, thriller noir, what do they call it? Yeah, I think it's just called a noir, which is not a genre I have any interest in, and yet she made it work. I just really like the way that this author writes. I also was surprised, once again, by how she can take the story in directions that I didn't think I wanted, but she makes it make sense. Like she does this with her endings a lot for me. Like there are things that I think could have been very frustrating, but they feel perfect for the story. I also really like the way she writes her characters. They're like unlikable characters that I still like. And I think it's also impressive that we follow two main characters' storylines, and even though I was definitely more invested in one than the other from the beginning, I still, like, I didn't, like, hate reading the other one. I think if you want, like, a fast-paced mystery or a thriller, this is not what that is. If you expect certain things from the story in terms of resolution, you're not going to be happy with that. And also just keep in mind that the two characters, even though their stories do intertwine, they don't actually directly connect until pretty far into the book. So like if you know all of that going in, I think you probably set yourself up for a better experience. And I definitely see why this is not something everybody likes, but I was once again very pleasantly surprised by the way that Sylvia Minor Garcia could win me over with a genre that I don't think I like. So I just need to trust her. I still don't want to read her sci-fi book, but I think pretty much everything else I'm on board for. This one you've heard a lot about, Curses by Lish McBride. This is a gender-swapped Beauty and the Beast retelling, which once again got very mixed reviews, and similar to some of these other books, I think part of it is expectation, because this is a very misleading book cover. I like the cover, but it makes it look a lot more dark and atmospheric than this book actually is. I think it's got a much lighter tone overall. There are definitely some dark things that happen, particularly in certain parts of the plot, but overall this is a lighter feel than this cover would suggest. And as I always say, it's not like a silly book, it's not like a parody or anything, but just go in, I think, knowing that it's not going to match this cover. But I just really enjoyed it. I liked the gender swapped aspects. I really loved the romance between the characters. And I've mentioned before that I've realized one of my favorite romance tropes is when one character helps the other with their love life and then they end up developing feelings. I just love that drama. And I really liked the way it was done here. I really liked a lot of the supporting characters. I also think that the male lead, I like both of our leads, and I think that the male character, who's the beauty character, he was really interesting because there were a lot of things about him that I don't usually like, but I think the book did a good job of setting up why he was that way, and showing that even from the beginning, he's gonna do better in the future, if that makes sense. So yeah, I really enjoyed this one. I see why not everyone does, but I had a great time with it. Dear Haiti, Love Elaine by Maika Mulit and Maritza Mulit. This is another book that actually surprised me in terms of the story, and I had heard from people that the book is not what you expect, and even knowing that, I was still surprised. This is definitely another one that you should check content warnings for, because it is so surprising, it's hard to get a feel for what you might want to be warned about. But yeah, I really liked our main character's voice. I really liked what this book did thematically, about family and history and trauma, and the way that it explored Haiti and like Haiti's past and how that connects to our main character's family's past. It also talks about things like charity and like the best ways to support other communities versus just making yourself feel good and that kind of thing. I just think this book did a lot of things really well. There's some parts of it that I'm unhappy with how they played out, but some of that I think is probably just the story that the authors were telling, you know? Anyway, I really liked this, and I'm really excited to read more from this sister author duo. Court of Lions by Somaya Daoud. This is the sequel and the concluding novel to Mirage, which is a sci fantasy that is inspired by Moroccan history and Moroccan elements that I really enjoyed the first book, and I think this is a very underhyped series. And this second book, I had pretty much heard most people were disappointed in it, and so I put off reading this one for like 1 or 2 years because I really liked book 1 and I didn't want to be disappointed by book 2. But unsurprisingly, because it's on this list, I really liked this. I really love the character growth that we have seen for both of our female main characters. I love what this book says thematically, like the politics of this world and the commentary on colonization and oppression. I love the very complicated sister, friend, enemy, whatever situation between Maram and Amani. Yeah, like one of the only things that I think didn't work as well from this book is the romantic relationships that both of our leads are involved in. I think those were still kind of underdeveloped, but compared to everything else I loved about this book, I think it was a pretty minor complaint. So yeah, like I know not everybody liked this one, but I think it was a really good conclusion. I have another Past It Classics pick, and that is Sunlight on a Broken Column by Atiya Hussein, and this is another example of a book that I obviously was hoping to enjoy, but I just hadn't heard very much about it. This book is just now back in print for the first time in several decades. It's considered a classic of partition. It's related to the partition of India, and it's also a classic of Muslim life from this time period, and I just really enjoyed this. I love the writing. I think the introduction by Kamila Shamsi, who is the great niece, I think, of Atiya Hussein, I think that was a really fantastic introduction because it doesn't spoil the book, but it does set you up for kind of some of the really great things about Hussein's writing. I think the character work was really interesting. This is definitely a very like slice of life book, and I could see that not working for everyone. But it really worked for me. I found Layla a really interesting character, and I found her very believable. Like, she's just kind of figuring herself out, and she's figuring out how she feels about things and how to express how she feels about things, and like she has beliefs and ideals, but how does she communicate those, and how does she see those in relation to other people she knows? And I just think that was really thoughtful. I also think this book is really interesting because it is known as a classic of partition. or that is related to the partition of India, but it doesn't do that in a direct way necessarily. I just think that was a really interesting choice, and it felt very effective for me. And I think especially the fourth part of this book is just really, really well written and well constructed. And yeah, like this is a book I definitely want to have more attention. I think it goes under the heading of underhyped classic. And I would definitely recommend this one. Emily of Deep Valley by Maud Hart Lovelace, illustrated by Vera Neville. So this was really interesting. The reason I picked this one up, I've been meaning to read things by this author for a while, but I picked it up because I was reading Steeped in Stories by Matali Perkins, and one of the books that she talks about is this one. So I decided to pick it up, and I ended up really enjoying it. I was really impressed by it in a lot of ways. This is one of those classics where I think in a lot of ways it's very ahead of its time. There are specific aspects that like it wouldn't be written that way now, but the core elements I think are really thoughtful, like very modern. I really loved our main character. I really love the message about how everybody's full and happy life is not going to look the same. Yeah, I just really enjoyed this one, and it was a pleasant surprise in a lot of ways, both by like how invested I got and also how impressed I was with the commentary in this book. Forestborn by Elaine Audrey Becker. This is the first book in a fantasy duology, and I have mentioned the very interesting way I came across this book. So one of my favorite books is Crimson Bound by Rosamund Hodge, and there is a concept, or like a kind of being in that book called Forestborn. So the title caught my eye, and it's not that I like thought this book would be like that other book, but that's the reason that this title stood out to me, and I liked the look of the cover and everything, and I was like, this looks interesting. So I look up the synopsis, and it sounds fantastic, and I end up buying the book on the strength of that. And I really enjoyed it. Basically, there are these magical beings called Forestborn. There are a lot of different kinds, and our main character Aurora and her brother are Forestborn, and they're very distrusted because several years ago there was this prophecy made that seems to maybe suggest it's about Aurora and her brother, like foretelling like danger if they showed up or if they were allowed to stay. And right after her and her brother got to the palace, the queen died, and every year after that the prophecy has pointed to kind of the same thing. So there are a lot of people who believe that Aurora and her brother are like dangerous, and like they're the reason that the queen died and all of this. There's also this magical sickness that is starting to affect non-magical people. At the very beginning of the book, one of the princes, the younger prince, who is Aurora's best friend, he gets sick with it. And so the royal family sends Aurora and her brother, and the older prince, who's not going to inherit, his older sister is, which I think is very cool, sends like her and her brother and this older prince on a mission to travel to this magical kingdom that is like very dangerous, and where Aurora and her brother are actually from, like to travel there and try to find a cure. And yeah, I just really liked this. I really liked our main characters. I really liked their relationships and how complex and messy those were. I really like Aurora's realization throughout the book, because she's always really blamed herself for certain things. I really liked her realizations throughout the book that people are not all good or all bad, and that maybe the way that she compares herself to her brother is not fair. And yeah, I just really, really enjoyed this. I found it very engaging. It does get quite dark in some places, so be aware of that. But yeah, I really liked this, and it was a very pleasant surprise because I hadn't even heard of it before it like came out basically. So really enjoyed that one. This is another one that you guys will already know would be on this list, and that is Once Upon a Broken Heart by Stephanie Garber. I have not read the other series from this author, and I've heard very mixed things that made me think I maybe wouldn't like her books either, but the premise of this one sounded really interesting, so I took a chance on it, and I really, really liked it. I really liked the writing and the setting. It's very like rich and whimsical, and this is a very like romantic fantasy, so if that's not your thing, you won't enjoy this. But I really liked it. I liked our main character Evangeline. She is definitely a hopeless romantic, which I don't mind in characters, but I also think sometimes those characters can be a little bit frustrating, and Evangeline wasn't for the most part. Like, I actually really liked her. I think Jax is a really interesting character. Again, like the setting was great. I'm really interested to see where the story goes in book 2. And like a lot of the books on this list, this wasn't like a favorite book for me. It wasn't a perfect book for me, and I did really enjoy this one overall. And finally, the last book in this marathon video that I wanted to mention is The Werewolf of Whitechapel by Susanna Roundtree. This is the first book in a historical urban fantasy series, like paranormal also. I'm not really great at distinguishing genres sometimes, but I really enjoyed this. This is a really, really interesting take on these magical creatures. This one obviously deals with werewolves, but there's also like vampires and sirens and other kinds of creatures in this world, and it's a really interesting view on a similar crime spree to the Jack the Ripper killings, which, like, Jack the Ripper is not something that I have a personal interest in, and this is definitely not like a retelling of that, but I think the author uses that as a starting point to talk about the way that we write off women's murders. And I just think it was so smart. This is also like a really fun book to read. Like, it's a really interesting and fun take on these fantasy tropes, but it also deals with these very serious ideas. Again, I think the commentary is great, like, and the symbolism of like monstrousness I think is just really interesting and really well done. I also really liked our main character. I also think there's some really interesting supporting characters that I'm excited to see more of, and I'm just really excited to continue reading from Susanna Roundtree. So really liked this one, and yeah, like, this one surprised me because I was more interested in the other books by this author, and but then I like decided to pick up this one for reasons you'll see in other videos. And I was like, oh, this sounds interesting too. And I ended up really, really loving it. And those are the books that surprised me this year. I know it was a lot. I hope it wasn't too many. Like I said, I always love doing this video because I can highlight a lot of different kinds of books that I really enjoyed or that were really interesting. Obviously, there's a few on this list, like East of Eden, for example, where I wouldn't necessarily say I enjoyed it as a whole. I definitely loved some parts of it and I hated others, and I'm just very mixed on it. This is kind of a good video to talk about those kinds of things, and I hope this like rapid fire review style was helpful at all. Please comment down below and let me know if you also enjoyed any of these books. Let me know a book that really surprised you this year. And yeah, I don't know why it's interesting why I ended up with so many surprises this year. Because I was trying to read books that I was excited about, so you'd think that that would give me less surprises because they're like books I expected to love and I did love, but for whatever reason I ended up with a ton of pleasant surprises this year, which I'm obviously really happy about. Thank you guys so much for watching. I will see you soon with another video, and I hope you love the next book you read. Bye!